This is Mujib from North Country Kettlebells. Today I'm going to talk about the Alternating Kettlebell Goblet Lunge and a few of the components that go into doing safe and effective Alternating Kettlebell Goblet Lunges. Now, the Alternating Kettlebell Goblet Lunge is a great movement for training the body how to maintain core engagement while going from kneeling to standing. So if I think about getting up off of the ground, whether I have something in my hands or not, this movement is really going to make it so that the body relies on the core muscles when standing versus just relying on the legs or the balance. I want the kettlebell to stay in the same position through the duration of my lunge. So once I get it into that rack position, again, I want to imagine that my body is essentially frozen in that position as I'm lunging back so that the kettlebell isn't dropping down as I get to the bottom. Now, as far as I like to consider the Alternating Kettlebell Goblet Lunge, I'll refer to it as a 3-part lunge. Now, what this means is that the first part of this movement is just going to be me taking a step backwards with one leg. If I can imagine that I'm standing on train tracks or if I have skis on my feet, then when I step back with that leg, I want to make sure that I'm still on the same line that I was standing on. So if I'm on a set of train tracks, when I step back on that line, I should still be on the same set of train tracks. In meaning that I don't want one foot to step directly behind the other. Instead, I really want my stance to allow me to maintain a wide base of support, and that's going to allow me to have a very strong stand up without losing my balance from one side to the other. So if I'm stepping back, I want to make sure that I'm still on the same line. When I'm doing this Alternating Kettlebell Goblet Lunge, I really want to consider my landmarked positions. So if I could draw a circle around each foot while I'm standing in a full hip extension, and when I step back with that one leg, if I could draw a circle around where that foot wants to be, I want to imagine that I am going to step in those same circles every single time. As always with the rest of our kettlebell movements, a large part of getting this movement to be progressive is to get it to be consistent. So if I'm stepping back to the same place each time, if I'm coming back up to the same place each time, then my body's going to get the benefit of the consistency in my practice, and that's going to lead to my overall progression. So when I step back, I always want to step back to the same place. Place my knee down, and as I come back up, I always want to put my foot back in the same place that I started from. So again, it's a 3-part lunge. Step back, place the knee, and then in one motion, stand back up to the same spot that that foot started in. Alternating just means that I'm going to switch legs each time, but I could do 5 on one side and then switch to the other side and do 5 on the other side as well. When I've stepped back with the leg and I place the knee on the ground, I want the toes on that back foot to remain active. So I want to think that I don't have the top of my foot flat on the ground, but instead I have my toes flexed and the ball of my foot is still on the ground. That way, when I go to stand up and I drive my hip extension, I can also be pushing off the ground with my feet. With that said, I don't necessarily want to rely on that foot to be the power source to get me back up. In fact, I always want to think that my hips are the power source for my lunges. So as I'm standing up, it's really a hip drive or a hip extension, and it's the power in that hip extension that's going to carry my back leg with it. I want to maintain the presentation of my chest. So again, if I have that kettlebell in the rack position, I don't want that kettlebell to droop down, but I also don't want it to pull my upper body forward. So as I stand up, I want to think that my chest is open, my shoulders are pulled back. I can think about it like my collarbones are trying to spread out. Any number of ways that I could think that I'm going to be keeping my chest up through the duration of this movement and not letting my shoulders pull my chest forward. With the practice of those proper positions, with my 3-part lunge, with keeping my chest up, things of that nature, I'm really setting myself up for practicing and strengthening my full kettlebell getup. As always, in the beginning, we want to try to keep the rep counts fairly low when we're doing the Alternating Kettlebell Goblet Lunge. Maybe 5 to 8 reps on each side, maybe 3 to 5 sets, depending on how you feel when you're doing this movement. But for the most part, we want to think for consistency of practice. I don't want my body to get exhausted during my set to the point where my form starts to break up. Try out the Alternating Kettlebell Goblet Lunge. Let me know how you feel about that. As always, our primary focus is going to be on safety and effectiveness, especially when we're looking at the Alternating Kettlebell Goblet Lunge. This is Mujib from North Country Kettlebells talking about the Alternating Kettlebell Goblet Lunge.